Hello, my name is Benjamin Hart. I'm an American attorney and the managing director of Integrity Legal here in Bangkok, Thailand. As the title of this video suggests, we're discussing the G20, and that's the group of 20, that's a number of nations. We'll get into some analysis on all that here in a moment. And we're talking about so-called vaccine passports. The reason I thought of making this video is I was reading a recent article from the Times of Oman, that's timesofoman.com. Article is titled, G20 Leaders Agree to Introduce COVID Vaccine Passports. And just the headline there, did any of the people in the G20 countries vote on this? Or did some guys just go hang out somewhere and decide on this? I'm just saying. Quoting directly, Muscat, in an attempt to have a better response to tackle future pandemic, leaders at the G20 summit in Indonesia signed a declaration to introduce vaccine passports for their respective jurisdictions. Again, where's the enabling legislation that allowed these folks to just go there and say, hey, yeah, we're going to do this? Quoting further, vaccine passports could create a global verification system to facilitate safe international travel. Quote, we acknowledge the importance of shared technical standards and verification methods. We do? Why? Have we ever needed that before? Did it particularly work the last 2.5 years? Quoting further, under the framework of the IHR 2005 to facilitate seamless international travel, well, I thought we had pretty seamless international travel again before the government intervened and shut everybody down. Quoting further, interoperability and recognizing digital solutions and non-digital solutions, including proof of vaccinations, read one of the clauses of the G20 Bali Leaders Declaration. It made me think of that movie, The Big Lebowski, the Port Huron Statement, not the original Port Huron Statement, not the compromised second draft. When I read the G20 Bali Leaders Declaration, quoting further, quote, we support continued international dialogue and collaboration on the establishment of trusted global digital health networks as part of the effort to strengthen prevention and response to future pandemics. Again, was the response this last time effective? Or could it be argued that perhaps the cure was worse than the disease? Quoting further, which should capitalize and build on the success of the existing standards and digital COVID-19 certificates. Capitalize and build on what success? Britain had this and they got rid of it because it didn't really work. So again, I'm really flabbergasted by the way, I'm not even particularly sort of concerned by the way that these folks get together and say this stuff. It's sort of the way the media just kind of throws it out there as, well, this is just a given. It's like, no, it's not. And the weird part is I lived through this. I remember this stuff. This wasn't, this wasn't 100 years ago. This was like 100 days ago that they were dealing with this stuff. And really, I really have to question not only the efficacy, but the morality of it. Meanwhile, okay, hold on just a second. I'll get into the analysis further because I got to thinking, I was sitting there, well, what is the G20? Okay, what is the G20? So I went over to Wikipedia, the sort of fount of conventional wisdom, if you will, and, went to G20. It's the entry under G20, and then under founding, G20, quoting directly. The G20 is the latest in a series of post-World War II initiatives aimed at international coordination of economic policy, which include institutions such as, quote, the Bretton Woods twins, unquote, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, and what is now the World Trade Organization. Again, what do any of those things have to do with public health? Quoting further, the G20 was foreshadowed at the Cologne summit of the G7 in June 1999, formally established at the G7 Finance Ministers meeting on 26 September 1999 with an inaugural meeting on 15 to 16 December 1999 in Berlin. So it's my understanding G7 was a meeting of finance ministers. G20 was kind of promulgated and given birth by that body to be a larger meeting of finance ministers. Again, what does that have to do with public health? They can say whatever they want about public health, but why should the public even listen? Are these public health experts on any level? Quoting further, Canadian Finance Minister Paul Martin was chosen as the first chairman, and German Finance Minister Hans Eichel hosted the inaugural meeting. That's neat. So the thing that concerns me about this is the presupposition of the existence of a vaccine passport would then presuppose that you need a vaccine in order to thereby get one, which presupposes a mandatory nature of vaccines, or at least a de facto mandatory nature of vaccines, in order to enjoy what, in my opinion, is the basic human right to travel, which is noted in the UN's Declaration of Human Rights. There's a basic human right to travel. It's also noted in the US Constitution, the right to travel for that matter. Many other countries note a basic inherent right of people to travel. It doesn't say a basic right to travel if you have the right paperwork. It's just a right to travel. So to sort of steal away that right and then say, well, we'll give it back to you if you meet these criteria, that's kind of a con, for lack of a better word. I mean, I don't really see how that's a great thing. Now, meanwhile, when this has to do with vaccination, it brings into question issues that came up during the promulgation of what's called the Nuremberg Code, which is that, look, you can't require people to undergo medical treatment without informed consent. Consent. And I'm sorry, but it's an in-run around consent to say, well, you don't have to do X, Y, Z, but if you don't do it, we're going to just trap you in this country. Now, look, I understand that there are, and I've talked about it on this channel, there are sovereignty issues associated with allowing foreigners into a given country's jurisdiction who haven't been treated for certain diseases. For example, Thailand had a malaria vaccination requirement years ago. Certain African countries still have that. I think that's perfectly valid. If a country on a national level says, hey, we consider this particular health issue to be of a major vital concern, those who want to come in, at least at this time, need to comport with these health requirements or they can't come in, I think that's a perfectly justified exercise of a given jurisdiction sovereignty. I don't see where there's any problem at all with that. But now you've gotten, quite honestly, people that I have no idea what they have to do with the public health sector. A bunch of presumably finance ministers and economic wonks got together and decided to make this declaration based on what expertise. Please enlighten me, and I'm happy to stand corrected in the comments. And do another video if I need to stand corrected. I'm happy to do that. But I really don't see where these guys have the expertise to make this declaration in the first place. But sorry, there's something seriously creepy and Orwellian about the notion that, well, you don't have international travel rights anymore unless you undergo this digitized documentation process that has to do with also something else on top of it, disclosing your confidential medical records. Your history with respect to medical treatment, that's patient confidentiality. Again, major stuff here. These are major philosophical and legal and just basic human right notions that are just sort of being swept aside because they just sort of say, oh, well, we need interoperability, whatever that means. So again, I got to say, G20, I'm not really smelling what you're selling on this one. And frankly, I think we need to take a much longer, harder look at this rather than just let a bunch of finance ministers get together and issue a declaration that we all just sort of say, okay,